One of my lasting memories of the Rugby World Cup was a 1-minute time-lapse video posted on YouTube that was trained on the faces of the crowd at Queen's Wharf during the final game. For the first half, the crowd was confident, boisterous, and in a mood to begin the victory party. After all, we had defeated the French handily just a couple games before. When a different French team returned in the second half to relive the last time they snatched victory from the All Blacks in a World Cup, the faces became anxious and anguished, painfully so in the last minutes. When the crowd realized that time had run out and miraculously the All Blacks' defense had held off the determined French to win the World Cup, the look of relief and joy at the narrow escape from despair was palpable. I was reminded of this graphic depiction of how close the line is between hope and despair a week ago, last Friday, as I walked through the empty venue in the long white cloud on Queen's Wharf, where that crowd was filmed. I carried with me some sprigs of rosemary, a bottle of water, and a bottle of baptismal oil as I made my way to the end of the wharf. 4 people who managed the wharf for the public's use attended me. They had asked me to come and bless and purify the wharf. For you see, one night, a week earlier, a young man had gotten past security and raced to the end of the wharf, jumping off into the dark waters below before they could reach him. As he swam in circles beyond their reach, they tried to convince him to return. Before a police boat could arrive, he vanished underneath the wharf. The next morning, divers recovered his body. The manager of the wharf had since learned the man was only 21 and had made an earlier attempt to take his life the week before. His parents told police he was mentally ill, and that's all they knew. They didn't even know his name. But they did know that the wharf, in its latest incarnation, was intended for life and celebration. And now it felt his demons of despair and hopelessness were still there. The manager had attended our Christmas Eve carol service. She only does it once a year, but she felt this was still her church. And she thought sure that we could and would help her. After gaining Nadi Fatoa's permission, she called to ask me, in essence, to cast out demons. I was struck and impressed by the manager's concern for the spiritual health of the space for which she is responsible. Although she claimed not to be religious particularly. Still, she went to heaps of trouble to heal the wharf, even though only a handful would ever know what had transpired there. Even fewer would know of the brief ceremony she arranged to be held there in the rain and wind of what has become a typical Auckland summer day. That didn't matter. She felt strongly that it was right and necessary to do. So I did my best. I prayed for the young man and his family, commended him to God, and tried to do the extraordinary with ordinary oil and water. Being asked to cast out demons is unusual enough in my life experience that it has induced considerable reflection about the fragility of hope, what it means to heal, and the nature of demons. This episode colored how I engaged with today's gospel account of Jesus' healing of Peter's mother-in-law. While a brief account, It engenders many questions and provides considerable grist for our theological imagination. For instance, how many remember Peter was or had been married? It says something about the role of women in the day that his wife is not mentioned and his mother-in-law has no name. But that's for a different sermon. The story also indicates that while Jesus was from Nazareth, Capernaum was where he was living prior to his ministry. It was in Capernaum he went to synagogue. It was in Capernaum he called his first disciples. It was in Capernaum that he began his healing ministry, first by restoring a young man much like the one who jumped off the wharf just before healing Peter's mother-in-law of her fever. Shortly after, he healed a leper, whom he asked not to broadcast what he had done for him. The grateful man couldn't contain himself and told everyone. So Jesus soon couldn't get out of Peter's front door due to the numbers asking for healing. It was enough to drive him to seek an isolated spot to pray. With such a successful healing practice, why didn't he just nail a shingle to the mother-in-law's house and stay in Capernaum? Clearly, there was plenty of work there to keep him busy. This and other healing stories is a challenge to our 21st century understanding of disease, mental illness, and what it takes to heal. I know my reading of these accounts is biased by faith healers that I used to watch, like Oral Roberts and Benny Hinn, who victimize the vulnerable by convincing them they will be cured by their physical impairments and life-threatening ailments if they just believe enough. It conjures up visions of the pile of crutches near the pool at Lourdes. But my skepticism is tempered when I consider the numerous healing stories about Jesus. I don't know what the facts of the case were behind these stories, but I can't quite make myself believe Jesus was a fraud. So I searched the stories for clues to understanding. Firstly, he lived in a world where demons were real to people, not metaphorical. Stories of casting them out were about spiritual warfare. They were about the power of good over evil, love over hate. Stories about casting them out were a way for his followers to express that God was working through him. Secondly, he lived in a world where illnesses weren't caused by bacteria or viruses. It was the direct result of God's disfavor. It was deserved divine punishment. Thirdly, he lived in a world that was divided by purity laws. Those who were ill or diseased were considered impure by the powers that be and pushed to the margins of society. They were not only sick, but left alone and hopeless as well. They were excluded, blamed, and reviled.